The wine arced through the air, a perfect, glistening ribbon of deep crimson against the restaurant's muted gold lighting. It was a 2005 Chateau Margaux, a wine that cost more than Amara's monthly rent, and it met her face not with the shattering violence of the glass, but with a cold, stinging splash. The heavy crystal goblet itself struck the wall just behind her shoulder, exploding in a spray of razor-sharp shards. Silence fell over the private dining room, a sudden, heavy blanket that smothered the soft music and the distant clatter of the main hall. Amara did not move. She stood perfectly still, the wine dripping from her chin onto the crisp white fabric of her uniform blouse, staining it a violent, spreading bloom of red. Her eyes, dark and impossibly calm, remained fixed on the woman who had thrown it. Isabel Vance, the American heiress engaged to the man at the head of the table, was breathing heavily, her face a mask of furious disbelief. Her perfectly manicured hand was still raised, trembling slightly. "Did you not hear me?" Isabel hissed, her voice thin and sharp. "I said this wine is corked. And you dared to question me." "You dared." The man at the head of the table, Kaito Tanaka, had not moved a muscle. His face was a study in stillness, his dark eyes watching the scene with an unnerving lack of expression that was far more terrifying than any open anger. His two guards, standing sentinel by the doors, were equally immobile, statues in bespoke suits. What Isabel did not know, what no one in that room could possibly know, was that the stillness Amara projected was not born of fear or shock. It was a shield forged in a life that had demanded she absorb blows without flinching, a life where reacting was a luxury she could never afford. She felt the sticky trickle of wine down her neck, the burn of it in her left eye, but her focus was absolute. She held Isabel's gaze, letting the silence stretch until it was a wire pulled taut. Then, in a voice that was quiet but carried across the room with the clarity of a bell, Amara spoke. "Who do you think you are? Welcome to our channel. If you enjoy stories that explore the quiet strength found in unexpected places, please consider subscribing. We bring you new narratives every week that honor courage and the human spirit. Now, let us get back to that silent room and the woman who had just asked a question that would change everything." Amara's life was a world away from Chateau Margaux and private dining rooms. It was a small, third-floor apartment that always smelled faintly of her neighbors' cooking and old books. Her days were a carefully balanced equation of survival and ambition. Mornings were for lectures in constitutional law, her mind wrestling with precedents and statutes, dreaming of a future where she could be a voice for those who had none. Afternoons were spent in the university library, the quiet hum of study a sanctuary from the city's noise. The nights belonged to the Gilded Cage, the ironically named fine dining establishment where she poured wine for people who wore the cost of her entire education on their wrists. Every dollar she earned was meticulously divided, a portion for rent on the tiny apartment she shared with no one, a portion for her meager grocery budget, a portion for textbooks. The largest portion, the one that gave her life its fierce and unwavering purpose, was wired every month to a small town in another state. It was for her younger brother, Micah, a brilliant boy with a scholarship that covered his tuition but not the cost of living. A phone call with him was the anchor of her week. "I aced the physics midterm, Amara," he had told her just the night before, his voice buzzing with an excitement she felt in her own bones. "Mr. Henderson said my paper on quantum entanglement was the best he's seen from a freshman." She had smiled, leaning against the cold glass of her window, picturing his face. "That's because you're a genius, Micah." "No," he'd said, his voice softening with an earnestness that always made her heart ache. "It's because you believe I am. Are you eating enough?" "You sound tired." "I'm fine," she had lied, the familiar, protective instinct rising up. "Just busy. You just focus on your work. That's your only job." Her job was this: to be invisible, efficient, and pleasant. To smile when a customer was rude, to apologize for mistakes that were not her own, to be a ghost in a crisp white uniform who made the machinery of wealth run smoothly. She could not afford to lose this job. The tips were good, and the base pay, while not generous, was reliable. Losing it would mean falling behind on Micah's support, a possibility she refused to entertain. It was this reality, the weight of her brother's future, that held her in place as the wine dripped onto the plush carpet. She was not just a waitress. She was a guardian, a provider, a sister holding the line. And there was a point where the cost of a job became too high, a point where the silence of complicity was a betrayal of everything she was working to become. That point had just been crossed. The manager, Mr. Davies, scurried into the room, his face pale and beaded with sweat. He was a man who lived in a constant state of low-grade panic, terrified of bad reviews and the powerful clientele he served. Seeing Amara standing there, drenched in wine, and Isabel Vance looking murderous, sent him into a tailspin. "My deepest apologies, Miss Vance, Mr. Tanaka," he stammered, bowing low. "This is inexcusable. Absolutely inexcusable. Please, allow us to correct this immediately." He shot Amara a look of pure, undiluted terror and fury.
"You."
"My office." Now, Amara gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She turned, walking past the two silent guards, her posture as straight and unbent as a pillar. She did not look at Kaito Tanaka, but she could feel his eyes on her, a heavy, unreadable pressure on her back. In Mr. Davies' small, cluttered office, the lecture began before the door was even closed. "Are you insane?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Do you have any idea who that is? That's Kaito Tanaka. His family practically owns the shipping lanes. The woman he is with can have this entire restaurant shut down with a single phone call. And you talk back to her." Amara stood before his desk, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. She met his frantic gaze, without apology. "She threw a glass at my head, Mr. Davies. She was displeased with the service," he retorted, as if that explained everything. "Your job is to de-escalate, to apologize, to fetch me, not to engage in a battle of wills." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "I have no choice. I have to let you go, Amara."
"I'm sorry."
"You're a good worker, but I can't risk it. We'll pay you for the month, but you have to leave now." Quietly, Amara absorbed the words. She had expected them. A cold knot of dread formed in her stomach as she thought of Micah, of the next wire transfer. But a deeper, calmer part of her felt a strange sense of peace. "I understand your position, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice even. "But I will not apologize for what happened in there. I did my job. I will not, however, be assaulted for it." Before Mr. Davies could respond, the office door opened without a knock. Kaito Tanaka filled the doorway, his presence sucking all the air from the tiny room. Mr. Davies froze, his mouth agape. Kaito's eyes were not on the manager. They were on Amara. He looked at her stained blouse, the faint red mark on her cheek where the wine had first hit. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, his voice low and devoid of any discernible emotion, he spoke to Mr. Davies. "Leave us." The manager looked from Kaito to Amara and back again, his mind clearly struggling to process the command. "Mr. Tanaka, I was just handling the—" "Now," Kaito said. The word was not loud, but it had the finality of a closing vault. Mr. Davies practically scrambled out of his own office, pulling the door shut behind him. Kaito stepped fully into the room, his gaze never leaving Amara. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. It was not empty, it was charged, analytical. He was waiting for something, waiting for her to break. Kaito Tanaka moved with a liquid grace that seemed at odds with his solid frame. He walked around the manager's desk and stood before her, not crowding her, but occupying the space with an authority that was absolute. He was closer now than he had been at the table, and Amara could see the faint, almost invisible scar that cut through his left eyebrow. His stillness was not empty. It was a containment field for immense energy. "You did not flinch," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, spoken with a quiet curiosity. Amara met his gaze directly. She had faced down bullies in the schoolyard and condescending professors in lecture halls. This was different, but the principle was the same. "Flinching is a concession," she replied, her voice steady. "It tells the person hurting you that they have power over your reactions. I will not give anyone that power, he considered her words, his head tilted slightly. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his dark eyes. And the question you asked her, who do you think you are? Why that? Amara thought of the law book she studied, of the fundamental principles of dignity and respect. Because people like her forget, she said simply. They believe their money or their name makes them a different class of human, one with the right to degrade others. I felt it was important to remind her that she is just a person, and her actions have consequences. She is my fiancée, Kaido stated, the words flat, testing. That does not grant her immunity from basic decency, Amara countered, without heat. Her behavior was indecent. There was another long pause. He walked to the small window that looked out over a dirty alleyway, his back to her. For a moment, Amara wondered if she had pushed too far, if this was the moment his calm finally broke. But when he turned back, his expression was unchanged. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and withdrew a thick, plain white envelope. He placed it on the desk. You are not fired, he said. Mr. Davies will be informed. This is for the dry cleaning, and for the insult you were forced to endure. Amara looked at the envelope. It was far too thick for dry cleaning money. It was a payment, a settlement, a way to smooth things over and close the incident. It was the kind of thing people like him did. I don't want your money, Mr. Tanaka. He looked at her, and for the first time, a real expression surfaced on his face. It was a faint, almost imperceptible hint of a smile, though it held no humor. It was a look of surprise, perhaps even respect. It is not a request, he said, his voice softer now. Consider it an apology. From me. Her behavior was not just indecent. It was a dishonor. He turned and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. Be at your post tomorrow. No one will trouble you again. And then he was gone, leaving Amara alone in the quiet office with an envelope full of money she did not want and a job she had miraculously kept. The encounter had left her more unsettled than the assault itself. She had looked into the eyes of a very dangerous man and seen not a monster, but something far more complicated. Something that recognized a piece of itself in her defiance. The next few days at the restaurant were unnervingly quiet. Mr. Davies avoided her, communicating only through other staff members. Her colleagues looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear, whispering when they thought she was not listening. Isabel Vance and Kaido Tanaka did not return. Amara tried to put the incident behind her, focusing on her studies and her shifts, on the familiar rhythm of her life. She tucked the envelope Kaido had given her into the back of a textbook, unopened. She would not use his money. It felt like a surrender. But Kaido's final words, "No one will trouble you again," turned out to be a lie. Or perhaps it was simply a promise he could not keep on behalf of others. The trouble came a week later. She was walking home after a late shift, the streets dark and slick with a recent rain. It was a route she knew by heart, a shortcut through a series of narrow service alleys that cut a precious 10 minutes off her journey. She was tired, her mind already on the legal brief she had to read before morning. That was why she did not notice the two men until they stepped out from a recessed doorway, blocking her path. They were large and dressed in cheap, ill-fitting suits, a stark contrast to the tailored perfection of Kaido's guards. They smelled of stale cigarettes and malice. Amara, is it? The first one asked, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He had a gold tooth that glinted in the dim light. Got a message for you. From a friend. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression neutral. She took a slow step back, her hand tightening on the strap of her backpack. I don't know you. Doesn't matter, the second one grunted, moving to block her retreat. Ms. Vance was very unhappy with your attitude. She thinks you need a lesson in respect. A permanent one, maybe. To remind you of your place, fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her. This was not the calculated power of Kaido Tanaka. This was something uglier, pettier. This was Isabel's raw, spoiled rage, outsourced to thugs who enjoyed their work. Amara knew screaming would be useless here. The alley was deserted. She clutched the small, worn wooden bird her father had carved for her years ago, a constant resident of her coat pocket. Its smooth, familiar shape was a small anchor in a sea of terror. She braced herself, her mind racing, searching for an escape, an opportunity. The first man took a step toward her, reaching out. "We're just going to mess up that pretty face a little," he sneered. "So you remember who you are," he lunged. Headlights sliced through the darkness of the alley, so sudden and bright that the men flinched back, momentarily blinded. A long, black sedan had appeared at the mouth of the alley, as silently as a shark. It hadn't been there a second ago. The engine was a low, powerful hum, a predator's growl. Before the two thugs could recover, the car's back doors opened. Two men in dark, perfectly fitted suits emerged. They were not the guards from the restaurant. These men moved with a chilling economy of motion, a lethal precision that spoke of a different kind of training. They did not rush. They flowed down the alley, their polished shoes making no sound on the wet pavement. Isabel's hired muscle, who had seemed so menacing moments before, now looked clumsy and brutish by comparison. The man with the gold tooth pulled a knife, a desperate, foolish move. One of Kaido's men disarmed him with a single, fluid motion, a sharp twist of the wrist that ended with a sickening crack of bone. The thug crumpled to the ground, cradling his broken arm and howling in pain. The other was dispatched with two precise, disabling strikes that left him gasping on the concrete, neutralized without a word being spoken. The entire confrontation lasted less than 5 seconds. The back door on the driver's side opened, and Kaido Tanaka stepped out. He surveyed the scene with a cold, dispassionate gaze, his eyes lingering on the whimpering man on the ground. He looked at Amara, who was pressed against the brick wall, her heart still pounding. His expression was grim, his jaw tight with a controlled fury that was terrifying to behold. He walked past her and stood over the man with the broken arm. "Who sent you?" Kaido's voice was dangerously soft. The man, delirious with pain, just sobbed. Kaido looked at his enforcer. "Find out," he then turned his attention to the second thug, who was trying to crawl away. Kaido's foot came down on the man's hand, pinning it to the ground. The man froze, his eyes wide with terror. "Tell Isabel Vance," Kaido said, his voice like chipping ice, "that if she ever touches so much as a shadow that falls on this woman again, I will dismantle her father's empire brick by brick. Tell her I know where all the bodies are buried. Because I helped him bury them." He lifted his foot and turned his back on them, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. He walked back to Amara, his face softening almost imperceptibly as he took in her wide, shocked eyes. "Are you harmed?" he asked. She could only shake her head, unable to find her voice. "I am taking you home," he said. It was not an offer. It was a statement of fact. He opened the back door of the sedan for her, a gesture of old-world courtesy that felt surreal in the aftermath of such brutal violence. As she slid onto the cool leather seat, she realized that Kaido Tanaka's promise had not been a lie after all. It had been a warning Isabel had been foolish enough to ignore. The inside of the car was an oasis of calm and luxury. The scent of leather and clean, conditioned air replaced the alley's stench of wet garbage. The city slid by outside the tinted windows, a silent film of blurred lights and rain-streaked streets. The silence between them was heavy, thick with unspoken questions. The violent efficiency of his men, his chilling message to Isabel, it all pointed to a truth Amara had only glimpsed. This was not just a wealthy businessman. This was a man who wielded power of a much older, darker kind. "You had me followed," she stated, her voice finally returning, though it was little more than a whisper. Kaido did not look at her. He stared straight ahead, at the partition separating them from the driver. "I had you protected," he corrected quietly. "There is a difference. I suspected," she would not let the insult pass. "Her vanity is a sickness. Protection?" Amara's voice gained a bit of strength, edged with indignation. "By men who break arms in alleys?" "The men who would have harmed you met a response proportionate to their intent," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "They are fortunate my response was not proportionate to the insult they offer me by their actions." A shiver went through her. He was talking about honor, a code that was as foreign to her world of legal statutes as another language. They drove in silence for a few more blocks before he spoke again, his voice losing its hard edge. "You are studying law," She was startled by the abrupt change of subject. Yes, why? She hesitated, unsure why she was telling him this, but the words came anyway. I want to help people who get caught in systems that are too big for them to fight alone. I believe the law should be a shield for the powerless, not a weapon for the powerful. He finally turned his head, and in the dim light of the passing street lamps, she saw a profound weariness in his eyes, a deep sadness that seemed ancient. A noble ambition, he said, a bitter irony lacing his words. In my world, there is no shield. There is only the weapon, and the one who wields it most effectively. The car pulled to a stop in front of her modest apartment building. The contrast between the gleaming luxury car and the crumbling facade was stark. Before she could get out, he put a hand gently on her arm. The touch was surprisingly warm, and it sent a jolt through her. Amara, he said, using her name for the first time. I am truly sorry that you were drawn into this. It was not my intention. He looked at her, his gaze direct and stripped of all its earlier coldness. You carry yourself with a strength that my world has forgotten how to value. Do not let people like us tarnish it. He released her arm, and the moment was broken. She got out of the car, and it pulled away as silently as it had arrived, disappearing into the night. She stood on the wet pavement, clutching her backpack, her mind reeling. He had apologized. A man who commanded such terrifying power had apologized to her, a waitress, with what felt like genuine regret. And in that moment of vulnerability, she had seen the truth. Kaido Tanaka was in a prison of his own. Here is the part of the story nobody saw coming. The part that was hidden behind the silent glares, the expensive dinners, and the cold, hard transactions of power. Kaido Tanaka was the reluctant heir to the Inagawakai, one of Japan's oldest and most formidable Yakuza clans. His father, the ailing Oyabun, had spent years trying to legitimize their operations, moving their vast fortune into shipping, technology, and real estate. But old alliances died hard, and old enemies never slept. The engagement to Isabel Vance was not about love or even affection. It was a treaty, written in the language of marriage. Her father, Marcus Vance, was a powerful and utterly ruthless American arms dealer with deep connections to private military contractors and shadow government agencies. The alliance would give the Inagawakai a foothold in a new, brutally lucrative market and provide a powerful Western ally against rival clans. For Kaido, it was a sentence. He had been educated in the West, had tasted a life of relative freedom, and held a deep contempt for the brutish, uncultured world of men like Marcus Vance. He despised Isabel for her vapid cruelty, her casual disdain for anyone she deemed beneath her. But to refuse the engagement would be to defy his father and declare war on the Vance Empire, a war his clan, in its current transitional state, might not survive. He was bound by Giri, the inescapable web of duty and obligation that defined his life. He was a prince being sold to secure a kingdom. And then, into this gilded cage of honor and violence, walked Amara. He had watched her that night, not just as a customer watches a waitress, but as a prisoner watches a bird flying free outside his window. He saw the way she carried herself, with a quiet dignity that no amount of money could buy. When Isabel had thrown that glass, he had felt a rage so pure and cold it almost broke his legendary composure. In that moment, Isabel had not just insulted a waitress, she had desecrated the very concept of honor in his presence, using his name and his power as a shield for her petty sadism. She had not cried, she had not cowered. She had stood her ground and returned the assault not with violence, but with a question that cut to the very heart of his own predicament. Who do you think you are? It was the question he longed to ask his father, his clan, and the entire world that had chained him to Isabel Vance. Her defiance was not reckless, it was principled. It was the kind of strength he had been taught to admire, the strength of the samurai who chooses death before dishonor. He saw in her a mirror of the man he might have been in another life. And so he had her watched, not to control her, but to protect the one small, authentic thing that had wandered into the corruption of his world. Isabel's pathetic attempt at retaliation was the final straw. It was the excuse he had been waiting for, the dishonorable act that gave him the justification he needed to break the chains. The end of the alliance was not a dramatic confrontation in a boardroom. It was a series of quiet, devastating moves. Kaido, using the formidable intelligence network of his clan, had been gathering information on Marcus Vance for months. He knew, as he had told the thug in the alley, where every body was buried. He knew about the illegal sales, the betrayed partners, the government officials on Vance's payroll. He didn't leak the information to the press. That was too clumsy. Instead, he sent a single, encrypted file to Vance's most dangerous competitor and another to a quietly ambitious prosecutor within the Department of Justice, a man known for his integrity. He didn't threaten Marcus Vance. He simply armed his enemies and let them do the work. The Vance empire began to crumble from the inside out within 48 hours. The engagement was called off in a terse, one-sentence statement released by the Tanaka family, citing irreconcilable differences in family honor. The dishonor was laid squarely at Isabel's feet. Kaido's final piece of business was a visit to the Gilded Cage. He did not come during dinner service. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, when the restaurant was empty save for the staff polishing silver and setting tables for the evening. He found Amara in a quiet corner, meticulously folding linen napkins, a textbook on civil procedure open beside her. She looked up as he approached, her expression wary. He was dressed not in his usual severe suit, but in a simple dark sweater and trousers. He looked younger, less burdened. "It is over," he said, his voice calm. "The engagement. You will not be troubled by them again." Ever, Amara stopped folding, her hands still on the crisp linen. She searched his face, seeing the truth of his words there. A weight she hadn't even fully acknowledged lifted from her shoulders. "What did you do?" she asked softly. "I merely pointed out that the foundation of their house was built on sand," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "The tide did the rest." He paused, his gaze serious. "I came here to make you an offer. Your education. I want to fund it. All of it. And your brother's as well. No strings attached. Not as a payment, but as an investment. You told me you want to be a shield for the powerless. The world needs more people like you. Let me be a silent partner in that work." Amara stared at him, speechless. This was more than she had ever dreamed of. It was freedom. It was a future for her and for Micah, unburdened by financial struggle. "Why?" she finally managed to ask. "Because," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate, confessional tone, "in my life, I have had to be a weapon. It would bring me a measure of peace to know I helped forge a shield." 6 months later, the world had changed. Amara walked across the sprawling green lawn of her university's main quad, a heavy stack of books in her arms. She was no longer a waitress. She was a full-time student, a member of the law review, a participant in the mock trial club. The constant, grinding worry about money had been replaced by a focused, joyful dedication to her studies. Her brother Micah was thriving, his letters filled with excitement about his own academic pursuits, no longer shadowed by the unspoken burden of his sister's sacrifice. Kaido had been true to his word. The money had appeared in a trust account, managed by a discreet law firm, with enough to cover tuition, living expenses, and a future for them both. There were no strings. He made no demands. But he had not disappeared. Once a week, he would be waiting for her outside the law library. He never came in a fancy car with drivers. He came alone on foot, and they would walk through the campus or a nearby park, talking. She told him about her classes, about the arguments she was crafting, about the ideals of justice she was learning to articulate. He told her very little about his own life. But he listened. He listened with an intensity and intelligence that challenged her and made her feel deeply seen. He spoke of philosophy, of history, of art. He was a man of profound depth, trapped in a life that had no use for it. Their relationship was a slow, quiet bloom, built not on passion but on a foundation of mutual respect and a shared sense of solitude. He was the only person who understood the steel in her spine, and she was the only person who had ever seen the prisoner behind his powerful facade. One cool autumn evening, as they sat on a bench watching the sunset paint the sky, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the small wooden bird. She had carried it for so long its edges were worn smooth. "My father gave this to me," she said quietly. "He told me it was a reminder that even the smallest creature has the freedom of the sky. That no cage can hold a spirit that wants to be free." Kaido looked at the simple carving in her palm, then back at her face, his eyes full of a gentle, aching tenderness. He reached out and, instead of touching the bird, his fingers gently brushed against hers. A brief, warm contact that spoke volumes. "Your father was a wise man," he said softly. "You, Amara, were never in a cage. You were the one who reminded me that the sky was still there." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded, two people from different worlds who had found in each other a quiet harbor. The future was unwritten, its path uncertain. But for the first time for both of them, it felt boundless and full of hope. What do you think is the true meaning of strength? Is it the power to command others, or the quiet courage to stand your ground? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of resilience and unexpected connection. We'll see you in the next story.